Staff Sergeant Everly Mitchell had been a Navy SEAL for 15 years when the operation in the Hindu Kush Mountains went wrong. The mission had started with compromised intelligence, the kind that got people killed. The primary landing zone showed signs of prepared positions, the kind of signs that suggested someone knew Americans were coming. Mitchell transmitted to the team leader, Lieutenant Commander James Torres, that the LZ looked compromised and recommended secondary insertion. Torres studied the terrain below through night vision. The secondary LZ was 2 kilometers away, which meant 2 additional kilometers of approach march through hostile territory. But Mitchell's instincts were usually right, and Torres had learned to trust them. The helicopters diverted, dropped the SEAL team at an alternate position, and extracted immediately. It was standard procedure for compromised operations. 8 SEALs in enemy territory. 2 kilometers from their objective with intelligence. That was clearly wrong about something. They'd moved through the darkness with the kind of tactical precision that came from hundreds of operations. Clearing terrain, maintaining security, closing distance on the target compound. Mitchell had been on point, her position because she had the best eyes in the team, could read terrain like other people read books, and had saved the team from ambush multiple times through situational awareness that bordered on supernatural. She'd been the one who spotted the first ambush position, fighters concealed in a natural depression that should have been perfect for killing Americans moving through the valley. She'd called it. The team had flanked it, eliminated 6 enemy fighters before they could spring their trap. That should have been their warning that tonight was going to be different. Should have been their signal that the enemy was prepared, was waiting, had known SEALs were coming, even if they didn't know exactly when or where. But missions had momentum, and once SEALs committed, they finished what they started. The compound had been their second warning. Not the light security that intelligence promised, but 40 fighters in defensive positions with interlocking fields of fire. The SEAL team had taken them anyway through superior tactics and marksmanship that turned prepared defenses into killing zones for the defenders rather than the attackers. Mitchell had been magnificent during that assault, moving through the compound like violence made flesh, clearing rooms with methodical precision. Her M4 carbine speaking with controlled bursts that eliminated threats before they could react. She'd saved Petty Officer Rodriguez when he'd walked into a prepared position, shooting 3 fighters before they could fire. She'd breached a door that had been booby-trapped, recognized the setup from minute details others would have missed, and disarmed it while under fire. The high-value target had been in the compound central building, trying to escape through a rear exit. Mitchell had been the one who cut him off, who'd eliminated his security, who'd completed the primary mission objective. While the rest of the team secured the perimeter, that's when everything went wrong. They'd been extracting from the compound, moving toward the helicopter pickup zone when the mortar started. Not random fire, but accurate pre-registered coordinates, walking explosions across their route. The enemy had backup, lots of backup, and had prepared multiple defensive layers that intelligence hadn't detected. The SEAL team fought through the mortar fire and took casualties. Rodriguez was down with shrapnel, Ching wounded but mobile, and they reached what they thought was cover in a rocky outcropping at the base of a cliff face. It wasn't cover, it was a kill zone. Enemy fighters on 3 sides firing from prepared positions, and above them on the cliff 40 feet up, more fighters with automatic weapons and grenades. The SEALs were pinned, taking fire from multiple directions with wounded men and extraction helicopters that couldn't land in a hot. LZ. Torres made the call that Mitchell had been expecting. Mitchell, you're our best climber. Get up that cliff. Eliminate the high position. Give us room to maneuver. She acknowledged and started climbing. No ropes, no equipment, just hands and feet, and 15 years of experience that had taught her how to find routes that shouldn't exist. The cliff face was nearly vertical, limestone with good friction but limited holds. The kind of climb that would challenge experts under ideal conditions. She was doing it at night under fire with an M4 carbine slung across her back and enemy. Fighters 40 feet above her trying to kill her. The first 20 feet had been manageable. Enough holds, good rock, using technique that was mostly muscle memory. The enemy above hadn't realized what she was doing initially. too focused on the seals below, not expecting anyone to climb a near vertical face under combat conditions. They'd noticed at 30 feet and started shooting down at her. Mitchell had pressed herself against the rock, making herself a smaller target, kept climbing while bullets impacted around her position. One round hit inches from her left hand, sending rock fragments into her face. She ignored it, found the next hold, pulled herself higher. At 50 feet she'd been close, could see the enemy positions above, could plan her assault when she topped the cliff, could see the faces of fighters who were starting to realize that the American climbing toward them was about to become a serious problem. One fighter, smarter or more experienced than the others, had leaned over the edge with an AK-47, aimed directly at Mitchell from 10 feet above. No way to miss at that range. No way for her to dodge while clinging to the cliff face. Mitchell had done the only thing she could. Released her left hand, grabbed her sidearm, fired 3 rounds upward before gravity could pull her off the cliff. The fighter dropped, falling past her position, screaming all the way down, but the action had put her off balance. She'd caught herself, reestablished her grip, continued climbing. 5 feet from the top, 3 feet, reaching for the final handhold that would let her pull herself onto the ledge and engage the remaining fighters with her rifle. That's when the bullet had caught her right shoulder, spinning her sideways, breaking her grip, sending her falling backward into empty air with 70 feet of nothing between her. And the rocks below that would kill her instantly. The enemy fighters above had celebrated. Thought they'd won. Thought gravity would finish what their bullet started. They didn't understand who they were fighting. Mitchell's fall lasted maybe 2 seconds. Felt like forever. Her mind went calm, not panicked, not scared, just calculating, assessing the situation, finding the solution. At 40 feet, her left hand shot out and caught a narrow outcropping that she'd noticed on the way up. A limestone shelf barely 2 inches wide that most climbers would never trust with their weight. Her fingers closed on it, absorbed the shock of stopping her fall, and despite the screaming pain in her wounded right shoulder, held firm. Her right hand followed half a second later, found purchase on a crack in the rock face, stopped her fall completely at 40 feet above the ground. The enemy fighters above stopped celebrating when they realized she was still on the cliff face. Still alive, still climbing. Mitchell hung there for 3 seconds, assessing damage. Right shoulder was bad. Bullet had gone through. Might have clipped bone. Definitely tore muscle, bleeding heavily. Her right arm was compromised. Strength reduced by at least 60%. Left arm would have to do most of the work. She looked down, saw her team pinned below, taking fire, Sean trying to treat Rodriguez while returning fire. Saw Torres looking up at her with an expression that mixed hope and disbelief. Then she looked up, saw enemy fighters at the cliff edge, 30 feet above her current position. Realizing their problem wasn't solved, seeing an American who should be dead still on the cliff face, still climbing toward them. Mitchell started climbing again with one arm mostly useless, using crimps and edges that barely accommodated fingertips, finding footholds that were little more than texture variations in the rock. Every pull sent agony through her shoulder. Every movement left blood on the limestone, but she climbed. Free soloing had taught her something that most people never learned. That pain was information, not limitation. That fear was distraction, not reality. That impossible was just another word for haven't found the solution yet. She climbed through. Pain that would have stopped most soldiers, climbed past damage that conventional wisdom said should prevent climbing. Climbed because her team was pinned below and the only way to save them was to reach the top of this cliff and eliminate the fighters who thought they'd killed her. At 55 feet, 15 feet from the top, an enemy fighter appeared at the cliff edge with a grenade, pulled the pin, prepared to drop it directly onto Mitchell's position from point-blank range. Mitchell did something that would have killed most climbers. She released her left hand, her only good hand, grabbed her sidearm and fired upward while her right hand and feet kept her on the cliff through friction and technique and sheer stubborn refusal to fall. 2 shots, both hit. The fighter collapsed. At the cliff edge, the grenade falling from his hands, but falling backward away from the cliff, detonating among his own position. The explosion created chaos above, enemy fighters scattering from the blast. Mitchell used those 5 seconds, climbed the final 15 feet with speed that seemed impossible for someone with a shoulder wound and one functional arm. Her left hand found the cliff edge, her body followed, and she pulled herself over the top onto level ground where 10 enemy fighters were recovering from the grenade explosion. She came over that cliff edge like fury made flesh. Her M4 carbine was already in her left hand. Her right arm couldn't support the weapon effectively, but her left arm could, and she'd trained ambidextrous shooting for exactly this kind of situation. The nearest fighter was 3 feet away, turning toward her. Raising his AK-47, Mitchell shot him twice, center mass before his rifle aligned. Stepped over his falling body, engaged the next target, controlled pairs, 2 shots, shift, 2 shots. The enemy had expected to deal with someone climbing a cliff, not someone who topped the cliff and immediately transitioned to combat engagement. She dropped 3 fighters in 4 seconds. The others scattered, seeking cover, trying to understand how the American they'd shot off the cliff was now on top of the cliff, killing them. Mitchell pressed her advantage, moved through their position with tactical precision, using their own cover against them. They'd prepared positions to fire down at the valley. She used those same positions to engage them from angles they hadn't anticipated. They'd created defensive structures to protect against assault from below. She attacked from their undefended rear. One fighter tried to run. Mitchell dropped him with a headshot at 20 meters. Another tried to throw a grenade. She shot him before he could release it, the grenade detonating in his hand and eliminating 2 more fighters who'd been taking cover behind him. In 90 seconds, she eliminated 8 enemy fighters and forced the remaining 2 to retreat down the mountain away from the cliff edge, away from positions where they could threaten her team. Then Mitchell moved to the cliff edge and started engaging the enemy positions that had her team pinned below. From her elevated position, she could see everything, could identify every enemy fighter, could engage targets that the SEALs below couldn't even see. Her M4 spoke with methodical precision, controlled bursts that eliminated threats with clinical efficiency. She transmitted, her voice calm despite the pain and blood loss, that the high ground was secured and told Torres to move when she suppressed. Torres didn't waste time asking how she'd survived being shot off a cliff. That discussion could wait. Mitchell suppressed the enemy positions nearest her team, pouring fire into their cover, forcing them to duck, giving the SEALs below the opportunity they needed. Torres moved the team, consolidating position, treating wounded, establishing better fighting positions now that the high ground was neutralized, but Mitchell could see what Torres couldn't. Enemy reinforcements moving through the valley. Another 30 to 40 fighters preparing to envelope the SEAL position. The team had maybe 3 minutes before they'd be completely surrounded. She recommended immediate extraction, informing Torres that enemy reinforcements were incoming from multiple vectors and their current position would be unsustainable in 3 minutes. Torres acknowledged and contacted the helicopters. The helicopter pilots, who'd been circling 5 kilometers away, waiting for the LZ to cool, didn't hesitate. They were inbound, ETA 4 minutes. The team needed to hold for 4 minutes against overwhelming numbers while helicopters flew into a hot landing zone. Mitchell made a decision. She told Torres she was staying on the high ground, that she could suppress enemy movement better from there, that he should extract the team and she'd climb down once they were clear. Torres responded negative, that they weren't leaving her. She insisted, pointing out that with respect, she had high ground, ammunition, and a shoulder wound that was going to need evac anyway. She could do more good up there suppressing than down there bleeding in his helicopter. Extract the team, she'd survive. Torres knew she was right, even if he didn't like it. Mitchell on the high ground with a rifle could suppress more enemy movement than she could contribute from the extraction point. And they didn't have time to get her down from the cliff. She'd have to climb down, which would take 5 minutes minimum in her condition. He acknowledged and told her to hold that position, that they'd come back for her. She understood and confirmed. She'd be there for the next 4 minutes. Staff Sergeant Everly Mitchell fought alone on top of a cliff in the Hindu Kush Mountains, suppressing enemy positions that tried to overrun her team. She was bleeding from her shoulder wound, functioning on adrenaline and determination, engaging targets with a rifle that kicked against injured muscle every time she fired. But she never stopped shooting, never gave the enemy the opportunity to advance, never let them get close enough to threaten the extraction. The helicopters came in fast and low, door gunners suppressing enemy positions, touching down just long enough for the SEAL team to board with their wounded. Rodriguez and Chung were loaded first. Torres and the others provided security. And 30 seconds after landing, the helicopters were airborne again. Pulling out of the valley under heavy fire, Mitchell watched them go from her position on the cliff top, felt relief that her team was safe, then turned her attention to the enemy fighters who were now focusing entirely on her position. 40 fighters all converging on the cliff top where one wounded American was surrounded and had nowhere to go. They thought they had her trapped, thought that being surrounded meant she was finished. They were about to learn another lesson about Navy SEALs, that being surrounded just means you can engage targets in any direction. Mitchell had 3 magazines remaining, 90 rounds. She could see approximately 40 enemy fighters moving to assault her position. The math was clear and not favorable, but math didn't account for training, experience, and the kind of determined aggression that came from knowing your team was safe, and you just had to survive long enough for extraction to return. She moved away from the cliff edge, found a defensive position in the rocks that gave her cover from multiple directions. Let the enemy fighters advance. Let them think they were cornering her. Let them get confident. When they were 30 meters away and closing, she engaged. Controlled bursts, target selection, prioritizing leaders and threats, using cover effectively, moving between positions to prevent them from fixing her location. She dropped 6 fighters in the first 15 seconds, scattered their advance, made them reconsider their easy victory. They returned fire, lots of fire, automatic weapons from multiple positions. Rounds impacted around Mitchell's position, forced her to stay low, limited her ability to engage. But she'd learned urban combat in Fallujah, mountain warfare in Afghanistan, close quarters battle in a dozen operations that never made the news. She knew how to fight from disadvantage, how to turn limitation into advantage through superior tactics. She let them advance again. Let them think suppressive fire was pinning her down. When they closed to 15 meters, she shifted positions, moved 10 m to the left through cover they didn't know existed, and engaged from a new angle they weren't prepared for. 3 more fighters down, the others diving for cover, confused, unable to establish her location. This pattern repeated 3 times. Let them advance, relocate, engage from an unexpected position. Each time she eliminated fighters, created chaos, prevented them from organizing an effective assault. But each time she moved, her shoulder wound bled more. Her right arm became less functional, her ammunition depleted further. Second magazine empty, 1 magazine remaining, 30 rounds. At least 25 fighters still active and closing. Sim Mitchell's radio crackled. The pilot informed her they were inbound her position, ETA 2 minutes, asking if she could make it to the extraction point. She responded that she was on top of a 40-foot cliff with approximately 25 hostiles between her and anywhere their helicopters could land, recommending they circle until she cleared a landing zone. There was a pause, then the pilot's voice, carefully controlled, asking if she was saying she was going to clear a Hot Elza by herself. She confirmed that was exactly what she was saying and told him to stand by. Mitchell checked her remaining ammunition. 30 rounds to eliminate or suppress 25 fighters, enough to create a safe landing zone. The math still didn't work. So she changed the math. She'd noticed earlier that several enemy fighters were carrying grenades. One, in particular, a fighter she'd observed coordinating the others, had multiple grenades on his vest. He was currently 50 meters away, using a rock formation for cover, directing other fighters to assault her position. Mitchell aimed carefully. Her wounded right shoulder screamed protest, But she steadied the rifle, controlled her breathing, and fired 3 rounds. All 3 hit the target's grenade vest. The grenades detonated. The explosion was massive. Multiple grenades going off simultaneously. The blast radius catching at least 6 fighters who'd been using the same rock formation for cover. 7 enemy fighters eliminated with 3 bullets. The surviving fighters panicked. They'd been in a coordinated assault and suddenly their leader had exploded, taking a third of their remaining force with him. Some scattered, some froze. All of them temporarily lost tactical cohesion. Mitchell used those 5 seconds, changed positions again, found elevation on a rock formation that gave her clear sight lines across the battlefield, started eliminating targets with systematic precision. 1 fighter trying to rally the others, shot. 2 fighters trying to flank her position, shot. 3 fighters setting up a machine gun. All shot before the weapon became operational. She was down to 10 rounds. 8 enemy fighters still combat effective. No time for subtlety. Mitchell stood up, exposing herself, making herself a target, drawing their fire. They shot at her. She shot back, standing wounded, operating on training and muscle memory and 15 years of experience that had taught her how to engage multiple targets under conditions that would paralyze most soldiers. She dropped 4 fighters before they could adjust their aim. The remaining 4 scattered, running, fleeing, understanding that staying in this fight meant dying. Mitchell keyed her radio and told the pilot the LZ was clear and to come get her. The helicopters appeared 30 seconds later, flying fast and low, door gunners watching for threats. They touched down 50 meters from Mitchell's position. She ran for it, ignoring the pain in her shoulder, ignoring the blood loss, ignoring everything. Except reaching that helicopter before enemy reinforcements arrived. She made it with 15 seconds to spare and collapsed in the helicopter doorway as it lifted off. Door gunners suppressing scattered enemy fire from retreating fighters who'd had enough of the American who wouldn't die. Lieutenant Commander Torres grabbed her and started treating her shoulder wound with field dressings. He told her she'd just held off 40 fighters by herself with 1 functional arm and asked how the hell she was alive. Mitchell looked at him and managed a weak smile despite the pain and exhaustion. She said that they'd pushed her off a mountain, that it was a bad tactical decision, that they should have known Navy SEALs don't need ropes to climb. The flight back to base took 20 minutes. Mitchell was conscious for about half of it. Then blood loss and exhaustion took over. She woke up in the base hospital 12 hours later, having survived surgery to repair her shoulder, having received a transfusion to replace blood loss, having been told by doctors that she should be dead from either the fall or the combat or the wounds or the combination of all 3, but she wasn't dead. She was alive, recovering, and already planning when she could return to duty. The after-action report described the operation as a near-catastrophic mission that was salvaged through exceptional individual performance. Staff Sergeant Mitchell was credited with eliminating over 30 enemy fighters, securing the high ground that allowed team extraction, and holding a position solo against overwhelming numbers while wounded. She was awarded the Navy Cross for extraordinary heroism in combat. The citation specifically mentioned the cliff climb under fire, surviving being shot off a cliff face, and the solo defense that prevented enemy forces from overrunning the extraction point. Mitchell didn't feel like a hero. She'd done her job, protected her team, completed the mission, survived through training and determination. The cliff climb had been necessity, not heroism. The solo defense had been tactical calculation, not bravery. Everything she'd done had been in service of ensuring her team made it home alive, but the SEAL community understood what she'd accomplished. Within naval special warfare, the story spread about the operator who'd been shot off a cliff and climbed back up one-handed to keep fighting, about the SEAL who'd held off 40 fighters solo while wounded, about Mitchell who'd proven that sometimes the most dangerous person in a firefight was the one you thought you'd already eliminated. 3 months later, after physical therapy and medical clearance, Mitchell returned to active duty. The shoulder had healed, not perfectly, but functionally. She could still climb, still shoot, still operate at the level required for special Operations. The first time she went on a training climb after recovering, her teammates watched nervously. The cliff face was only 40 feet, not challenging by Mitchell's standards, but it was the first time since the Hindu Kush that she'd climbed without ropes. She free-soloed it in 90 seconds, reaching the top without hesitation or difficulty, her repaired shoulder functioning well enough for the movements required. At the top, she looked down at her team, smiled, and called out that she still didn't need ropes. The team had cheered, relieved that their best climber was back to full capability. But Mitchell knew something they didn't. That the climb itself hadn't been the hard part. Climbing 40 feet of rock was physical challenge, technique, and strength. What she'd done in the Hindu Kush had been different. That had been about refusing to accept that falling meant failing. About understanding that setbacks were temporary, that getting knocked down just meant you climbed back up, that enemy action could wound you but couldn't stop you unless you let it. They'd pushed her off the mountain, thinking gravity and bullets would finish what they started. They'd been wrong about everything. Wrong about her resilience, wrong about her capability, wrong about what Navy SEALs could survive. Because the thing about special operations warriors was that they were selected and trained specifically for situations that would break normal soldiers. Trained to operate when wounded, to fight when surrounded, to succeed when conventional wisdom said failure was inevitable. Trained to climb mountains without ropes, to survive falls that should kill, to keep fighting when stopping would be so much easier. Staff Sergeant Everly Mitchell embodied that training. She'd been shot off a cliff face and had caught herself 40 feet up through technique and determination, had climbed back to the top with one functional arm because her team needed her to reach that position, had held off overwhelming numbers because extraction required someone to suppress enemy movement, had survived everything through training that had prepared her for exactly these kinds of impossible situations. That was the lesson of the Hindu Kush operation. Not that Mitchell was superhuman, she wasn't. She was just exceptionally trained, determined and unwilling to let her team down, regardless of personal cost. The cliff climb had been impressive, but it was the decision to climb after being shot that defined her character. The solo defense had been tactically sound, but it was the refusal to give up when surrounded that demonstrated her commitment. They'd pushed her off the mountain, she climbed back up. They surrounded her with overwhelming numbers. She fought until her team was safe. They tried to kill her through bullets, falls, and sustained combat. She survived through training, determination, and the kind of stubborn refusal to quit that defined Navy SEALs at their best. The enemy learned an expensive lesson that night, that pushing Navy SEALs off mountains just makes them angry, and angry SEALs are significantly more dangerous than calm ones. Years later, when Mitchell had transitioned to instructor duty, she'd used the Hindu Kush operation as a teaching moment for new SEAL candidates. She'd show them the cliff face, not the actual one in Afghanistan, but a training wall that approximated the dimensions and difficulty. Then she'd have them climb it with full gear under time pressure, with instructors simulating enemy fire. Most failed the first time, got halfway up, lost confidence, came back down. Mitchell would watch them fail, then gather them together and explain what failure meant in actual operations. In the Hindu Kush, she'd tell them, she got shot off a cliff at 60 feet, had a bullet through her shoulder, right arm mostly useless, team pinned below her, enemy fighters above her, and 70 feet of empty air underneath her. Falling, she'd pause, let them visualize the scenario. "You know what I did?" she'd ask. "I caught myself at 40 feet, stopped the fall, started climbing again. Not because I'm special, because I'd trained for exactly that scenario. Because muscle memory took over when conscious thought would have meant death. Because the mission required me to reach the top of that cliff, and being shot or falling wasn't going to change that requirement." Then she'd point at the training wall. "This wall represents every obstacle you'll face in this career," she'd explain. Physical challenges, tactical problems, situations where conventional solutions won't work. You can quit when it gets hard. Nobody will force you to continue. Or you can understand that being a SEAL means climbing anyway. finding solutions when obvious paths don't exist, and refusing to let your team down, regardless of personal cost. Every class that heard that speech had a higher pass rate on the climbing qualification. Because Mitchell's example, the operator who'd been shot off a cliff and climbed back up to save her team, demonstrated what was possible when training met determination met absolute refusal to quit. The story became legend. Within naval special warfare, new operators heard about Mitchell before they met her. Heard about the cliff climb, the solo defense, the warrior who'd survived impossible circumstances through skill and determination. Some thought the story was exaggerated. Nobody could actually catch themselves mid-fall and climb a cliff one-handed while wounded. Then they'd meet Mitchell, watch her free solo training walls that challenged experienced climbers, watch her engage targets with ambidextrous shooting that demonstrated complete comfort with weapons regardless of which hand held them. Watch her operate with the kind of calm competence that came from surviving situations where panic would have meant death. And they'd understand that the story wasn't exaggerated. If anything, it undersold what she'd accomplished because the story focused on physical achievements, the climb, the shooting, the survival. It didn't capture the mental strength required to remain tactical when wounded and surrounded, didn't explain the decision-making process that had turned desperate circumstances into mission success, didn't convey the kind of determined focus that let someone function at peak performance while their body was telling them to quit. That was Mitchell's real legacy. Not the specific actions in the Hindu Kush. Those were remarkable, but ultimately just one mission in a long career. Her legacy was demonstrating what special operations warriors could achieve when they refused to accept that circumstances determined outcomes, when they understood that being shot or wounded or surrounded just meant you adapted tactics, found solutions, and kept fighting until the mission succeeded or you physically couldn't continue. Everly Mitchell, the operator who didn't need ropes, the SEAL who proved that falling was just another problem to solve, the warrior who taught everyone that sometimes the most dangerous moment for your enemy is when they think they've already won. She returned to operations, completed another 3 years of deployments, saved more lives, completed more missions, and eventually retired from active duty to become an instructor, teaching new SEALs the skills that had saved her life in the Hindu Kush Mountains. But she never forgot the lesson of that night, that gravity was physics, not limitation. That being knocked down just meant you climb back up, that Navy SEALs didn't need ropes to climb. They just needed determination, training, and the absolute refusal to let their team down. They pushed her off the mountain. She climbed back up and finished the mission. That was the story. That was the reality. That was what happened when enemies underestimated Navy SEALs and learned too late that some warriors don't stay down regardless of what you do to them. Every single time the mountain had tried to kill her through gravity, the enemy had tried to kill her through bullets and numbers. Combat had tried to kill her through wounds and blood loss. None of it worked because Everly Mitchell understood something fundamental about being a warrior, that circumstances could make success difficult, but only surrender could make it impossible. And Navy SEALs didn't surrender, they climbed. They fought. They survived. They completed the mission. With or without ropes, with or without support, with or without perfect conditions, they climbed back up. They finished what they started. They proved that determination and training could overcome obstacles that seemed insurmountable. That was the lesson. That was the legacy. That was what happened when someone pushed a Navy SEAL off a mountain and learned too late that SEALs don't need ropes. They just need a reason to climb, a team to protect, and the absolute refusal to let gravity or bullets or enemy fighters determine the outcome. Everly Mitchell climbed that cliff, saved her team, completed the mission, survived to train the next generation. And somewhere in the Hindu Kush Mountains, there's a cliff face with bloodstains at 40 feet where a Navy SEAL caught herself mid-fall and climbed back up to prove that sometimes falling is just the beginning of the most important climb you'll ever make.